Hi guys, I recently realized that my 2021 favorite books of the year video will be my 6th yearly favorites video. And I had seen people do a my favorite books of the last 5 years type of tag. So in this window of time before the 6th edition, I want to review my favorite books from 2016 to 2020 and see what has held up. Sorry, I can't sit like this for the majority of the video. There's a languid goddess over my shoulder. 2016. Let's see what she got. That is, wow. Cherry red hair. Okay. We are starting this video with Villette by Charlotte Bronte. Okay. Okay. I'm going to say that this one wouldn't make a favorites of the last 5 years list, but it would definitely make a best books of the last 5 years. Villette has the most immaculate first chapter I've ever read. It sets up the entire emotional landscape of the book. Bodies of Light by Sarah Moss. This is interesting right away. I'm surprised that this is this low on the list because this is still my favorite of Sarah Moss's books that I've read. I've read I think 7 of them. I haven't read her 2 most recent, but everything up until Ghostwall. I know there are many books coming up, so I'm going to be really harsh on myself to start and put this in a sort of honorable mentions category. And if I want to put it on the final favorites list, I will. What books are coming up higher on this list? Okay, this is Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeline Tien, which I am putting in the favorites category. We will revisit all my favorites at the end. One by Sarah Crossan. Okay, this isn't going on the ultimate favorites list, but it is, you know, top YA that I've read in the past 5 years. It's told in free verse and it's from the perspective of a girl who's a conjoined twin. The Laramie Project by Moises Kaufman and the Tectonic Theater. Is it Tectonic Theater Project? Yeah. All these years later, I do still think about the Matthew Shepard story, and a lot of that is due to having read The Laramie Project. The Accidental by Ali Smith. This was my first Ali Smith. I fell head over heels for this book. It still is one of my favorites from her. I'm going to be incredibly restrained and not put it on for now because I think there's another Ali Smith book coming down the pike that might edge this one out. One Child, The Story of a Child's Most Radical Experiment by Mei Fong. It's such an approachable nonfiction book in a lot of respects, in its length, in its framing, in the writing style itself, while also just being excellent nonfiction. And I would recommend it to a lot of people. My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry by Fredrik Backman was number 2 on my 2016 favorites. Hang on. My feelings about this book have been influenced by my later experiences with this author. So when I read this particular novel, I thought that the whimsy and the longing and the childishness were all due to the fact that the protagonist is a 7-year-old girl whose grandmother has just died and she's missing her and she's trying to find connections to the imaginary worlds that her grandmother created. And then I read other books by Fredrik Backman and it was the same voice regardless of the protagonist. Actually, a similar thing happened to me with John Green where I really liked The Fault in Our Stars. And then I read Looking for Alaska and I was like, oh, the voices that I thought were Hazel and Augustus were just John Green's approximation of a teenager all along. Like that was John Green. It wasn't those characters. And that's kind of how I feel now about this book, where I'm like, it isn't this little girl. It's just how Fredrik Backman writes. But that being said, I do think that if I read this again in isolation, I would still really enjoy it. What is number 1? This is suspenseful. Okay, it's The Portable of Evelyn by Elizabeth Mackenzie, and this is going on the list. I highlighted 9 books in 2016, and I've just chosen 2. The Restraint. And I remember that this 2017 favorites list was amazing. Maybe the best year since I've been on BookTube in terms of the highest highs. No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre. This is how we're starting this video? I love this play. I know that probably makes me basic in terms of people who, you know, read a lot of plays, see a lot of live theater, that enjoying No Exit is like, oh, like baby's first existentialism, but I do love it. The Lowland by June Lahiri, still such an accomplished book, and I love the control in her writing. It really speaks to something in me as a reader, but I wouldn't say that this is an absolute favorite. When My Brother Was an Aztec by Natalie Diaz. I think if I'm going to be brutal here, I'll say that this would more fall in the honorable mentions category just because, as I've said many times, I am not a particularly prolific or sensitive poetry reader. The Lesser Bohemians by Emer McBride. I've been harsher on The Lesser Bohemians in the ensuing years. I think its strengths are extraordinarily strong. But there is a section that's told from a different perspective in the middle of the book that I think detracts more from the overall story more than I acknowledged to myself at the time. Next is The Lie Tree by Frances Hardin. It's not gonna make the Ruthless cut, but this might be my absolute favorite YA book that I've read in the last 5 years. It was really hyped up at the time, and one of those books where I really think the hype was justified. The Red Parts by Maggie Nelson. I've read, I think, 4 of Maggie Nelson's books, and this is by far my favorite. I think this is so incredibly insightful and unsettling. It's reflecting on her aunt's murder, her murder trial, and Maggie Nelson's own relationship to the way that that story is told, both by other people and by herself. And it's that self-probing of why she feels that she can take over and be a voice telling the story that I find most interesting. Winter by Ellie Smith. Okay, yes, going on the favorites list. Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. This isn't actually my favorite of Hobbs, and I'm hoping that my later self acknowledged that. Lincoln in the Bardo. Done, dusted, favorite. A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. I just love A Room of One's Own. And it's one of those things too where I've actually heard several people, both on BookTube and in real life, say, I haven't read A Room of One's Own, but I sort of think I get it. I get the message. And I'm not trying to be mean to people, because you don't have to read this book if you don't actually have an interest in reading it and you'd rather just know the general message of it. But you don't get it if you haven't read it. It's so complex in the way it's constructed, and it's the way that she makes her arguments. I can't recommend it enough. But I know I've been doing this a lot, but I think that there's another Virginia Woolf in a later video. I'm hoping I put it on there. Middlemarch. Yes, favorite. That wasn't my favorite book of that year. Margaret the First by Danielle Dutton. This is one of the best executed novels in terms of it switches from first person to third person in a way that I think is perfect for the thematic underpinnings of the whole book. Oh, and I love the language in here too. I have really strong memories of this book. I think if I'm being completely truthful, it would be more in the category of an honorable mention when I'm looking at books like Middlemarch. I featured 12 books in 2017. Wow, that's way fewer than I would have thought for that year. And I am taking 3 of the 12. This is so fun. This is like an advent calendar, but for the past 2018. I am really curious what's going to be on here, because I do remember, especially compared to 2017, like my feeling as I was making this 2018 video, that I wasn't, reaching the peaks of that last year. After You'd Gone by Maggie O'Farrell, I've read 5 of her novels now. I've been reading them in chronological order. This was her debut. And I think this is still my favorite of those 5, although especially as I got to her 5th book, I could see the development of her writing style and really honing her craft. But I think in most other years on my channel, this probably wouldn't have made a favorites list. Educated by Tara Westover. This is one of my most widely recommended books. Whenever somebody comes to me, and if they're somebody who hasn't read in a while, maybe, or they're looking for something to get into when they're feeling kind of down and don't think they can engage with something that's on an incredibly high plane or whatever, but they still want a story with a lot of substance and that's written well, this is the book that I recommend. When I Hit You by Mina Kandasamy, that was definitely my favorite of that year's Women's Prize. If I'm remembering correctly, that was an absolutely brutal long list, so I can't even tell you how much I truly appreciated When I Hit You. But what I really appreciate about this book is that when I think of it, I think of my twin brother, because I recommended it to him. He read it and became obsessed with it. At least 5 people have read When I Hit You because of my brother's recommendation, and probably far more, and they all have come back to him and said that they thought it was incredible. David Copperfield. What I'll say about this is not going on an absolute favorites, because I still don't love Dickens to that degree. Even the top of Dickens is not going to be my top, but this was my first Dickens novel that I actually loved, and it is the one that has made me want to continue with his work. Golden Fool by Robin Hobb. Favorite Robin Hobb book. Oh my god, yes. favorite. Signs for Lost Children by Sarah Moss. I do prefer Bodies of Light, but I think Signs for Lost Children is her best book that I've read. I strongly recommend that Neo-Victorian diptych, and then Night Waking as well, which is a contemporary book, but that's associated with these two stories. Really underrated, in my opinion. Regarding the Pain of Others by Susan Sontag, favorite. Fire Sermon by Jamie Quatro, interesting. That's interesting that it's up so high. It's not going to make an absolute favorites list just because it hasn't had that kind of wow, definite lasting impact that some of the other books I'm choosing have. It deals with lust and desire spiritually, sexually, bodily, intellectually, the intermingling of all those different ways that we experience desire. Cost of Living by Deborah Levy. Well, I think my reaction is telling you that it's a favorite. If this is number 2, what was number 1? Prairie Fires by Caroline Fraser. Oh my God, this is like the book for me. No question favorite. So 2018, I featured 10 books that year, and I am bringing 4 with me. 4 from 2018 when I took 3 from 2017. Theoretically, I should be remembering these better as we go along, but I'm feeling very much in the dark about this particular year. The Evolution of Beauty by Richard O. Prume. I especially appreciate this because of the way that it expanded my idea of what kind of science nonfiction I could read. I would like to read more books of this kind for sure. Good Talk by Mira Jacob. It wasn't that I didn't like that book, but I am surprised to see it on here. I did see some criticism from the graphic novel community generally of this book, that it was so clearly somebody who is not skilled at this craft. I think for me as a lay reader, not having a real sensitive understanding of the relationship between images and text, that I didn't mind that at all, and I think it was still really effective. Lovely War by Julie Berry. Okay, this and The Lie Tree I think would have to tie for my favorite YA of the past 5 years. Again, I know I'm saying this about a lot of books, but in terms of what I would widely recommend, this has got to be up there. I'm saying it in the video right here that using the word lovely for it feels lazy because of the title, but it is lovely. Secondhand Time by Svetlana Alexievich. What do I do with you? What's interesting here is that I would probably say that there's no individual Svetlana Alexievich book that is on its own a favorite, that it's her cumulative work that has been so meaningful to me over the past few years. And I guess I could choose this as a representation of that. I'm surprised that Zinky Boys didn't appear on an earlier list. Is it possible that I read that before BookTube? Maggie Brown and Others by Peter Orner. Wow, I am really revealing myself here that is this the first short story collection that has appeared on any of these lists? I think that is a reflection of me not reading many short story collections, but also of how difficult it is for one to have that entire wow factor that a novel can more easily sustain. Book by Name by Chanel Miller. I think so highly of this memoir. It had the kind of topical hype that made me a little wary going in about the quality of the experience being as high as it was portrayed. And it was. It really, really lives up to it. Bookman by Anna Burns. This is low on the list. And I'm gonna catapult it to the favorites. Giving Up the Ghost by Hilary Mantel. I want to reread this because of its observations on the medical system and bodily identity. Brightness Long Ago by Guy Gabriel Kay. Again, this is one that in recommending it to my brother and seeing him love it, he has then gone on to recommend it to many more people. Anybody who likes fantasy who he encounters, he's like, have you heard of Guy Gabriel Kay? And often they say no, and he's like, do I have a book for you? Cleopatra A Life by Stacy Schiff. In terms of sections from a book that I can still describe clearly on my end, I mean, I remember so many details in this. I think it has shaped also the way that I think about ancient Rome in particular, and Rome in comparison to Alexandria. I had forgotten this was on here. This is Old Baggage by Alyssa Evans. This is dealing with feelings of being underappreciated in your field as you grow older, and this is specifically with different waves of feminism. And I'm not going to lie, I do have slightly more complex feelings because of the author in the years since. But in terms of the book itself, I think it's a great experience. Mrs. Dalloway, I knew it. I knew that I had put it on here. Well, I didn't know, but I hoped. This is a favorite. That was number 4 for that year. Barchester Towers. Yes, yes, yes. In America by Susan Sontag. This is a more polarizing novel than I realized. I think it's brilliant. I love every component of this novel so much. I think I'm going to let her nonfiction represent my Susan Sontag love. Amy and Isabel. Ah, yes. I still just can't believe this is just the best debut. It's absurd. Yes, favorite. That was 15 books that I highlighted that year. And I chose 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4. That's not bad. Right. Concluding our parade of turtlenecks with 2020. I do remember most of the books that I have on this list. I'm not sure how I ordered them. And I do like that it's been a full year since I've read any of these. And so I have like a bit of distance from them, but of course not as much as for the other videos. Talk. Pericles. This book is awful. Oh, it's awful. And what a great time it is too. Not an absolute favorite, though. I don't hate myself enough for that. Wasted Morning by Gabriela Adamashianu. What a lovely book this is. But in this moment, not having the same wow factor as some of the others. When He Was Wicked by Julia Quinn. Yeah, I mean, I read all the Bridgerton books last year. And this was my favorite of them. What are you going through, Jessica Nunez? It's tough to decide on this one. It is so entwined. I'm speaking about this in my 2020 video. It's so entwined with the death of a family member, and it's about death and grieving and loneliness, but all that executed with this playful multi-layering of voices. Yeah, that I think if I'm vacillating, I'm typically going to put it in the honorable mentions category, and that's where this is going. How I Came to Know Fish by Ota Pavel. This is showing my limitations of vocabulary because I just want to say lovely for this book too. It is a lovely memoir, and I've been reconnecting with Czech as a language, and I would love to be able to read the original. Fool's Assassin. All right, girl, we get it. You like Robin Hobb. Passing by Nella Larson. This is one of those where I'm just so grateful to Britt Bennett for highlighting this book specifically in the ways that she was talking about her incredibly popular novel, The Vanishing Half, because it has had a real resurgence, largely just due to that influence, and we are all better for it. Border. Yes. Same with Bloodlands. I think I'll be taking a greater proportion of 2020 books, and that a lot of that might be recency bias. But this also was such a formative nonfiction year for me, and Border and Bloodlands represent that in different ways. Oh, I'm arbitrarily feeling the pressure to be stricter. But I mean, what's the point of not putting The Portrait of a Lady on my favorites list? I'd be a liar. Okay, what's going on? Blue Nights by Joan Didion. I am so moved by both of her grief memoirs, largely because she's making absolutely no attempt to move me. This is about the death of her only daughter, to a strange and sudden, but then oddly prolonged illness, and thinking back on all these fragmented perceptions of her time with her daughter and the ways that she maybe did and didn't love her the way that she would have wanted. Blue Nights would be at the top of my honorable mentions. And speaking of honorable mentions, The Masochist by Katya Perat. I'm coming up against all of these subcategories of different types of like enjoyment of books, and this would fall into the category of a book that every time I think about it, I think, oh, I'd like to reread that. It's like when you pass Annie Ann's and you think, maybe I'll get Annie Ann's. The Iliad. It's a favorite. It's a favorite. Oh, but if this is number 3, The Door is also a favorite. I remember what number 1 is. Number 1 is Lila by Marilyn Robinson. That's another favorite. Okay. Let me assess the damage here. There are 15 books on the 2020 list, and I just took 6 of them. All right, if you're still with me, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go try to find these absolute favorites physically on my shelves, arrange them in a loose order, and introduce them to you again. I've done it. I've found them. I've ordered them. There are 19, which of course means on average I took fewer than 4 each year. Number 19 is going to be The Portable Veblen by Elizabeth Mackenzie. The only reason it's number 19 is I do feel the effects of it being almost 6 years removed from the time that I read it. I think this is a bizarre little comic masterpiece. The first scene is an engagement scene, and it's about how all the baggage from their dysfunctional families might disrupt their relationship. This is one of the main reasons I have a YouTube channel, because when it was shortlisted for the Women's Prize, I felt that, I mean, across American, British, and Canadian booktubers that I was watching, it was underappreciated and at times besmirched. Number 18 is Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope. The pacing of it and the exhilaration and the brazen fun of it all. It takes place in 19th century provincial England and is about the mixture of the clergy and the upper class, and has so many characters who are explicitly framed as unlikable, but even the ones who are likable, it's implied that their very likability makes them unlikable too. There's such a combination of gentle and vicious judgment in here. It's delicious. 17 is Bloodlands, Europe Between Hitler and Stalin by Timothy Snyder. I read this because it was a main comparison title for a book that I was selling abroad. There's a reason that this is a comparison title for the work that has come after it. To take many stories with which I was familiar and those with which I was not, and to combine them in this way has fundamentally changed the way that I think about World War II. Number 16 is Amy and Isabel by Elizabeth Strout. Like I mentioned, this was her debut novel, and the crafting of each sentence and of each paragraph and of each chapter, and then subsequently of the book, beauty. It's beauty, okay? This is about a strained relationship between a single mother and her teenage daughter. Number 15 is Homer's Iliad. Even if you know the outlines of the story of the Iliad, which you probably do through cultural osmosis, the actual text is vivid beyond description and rich and textured and peopled with these, like, the word unforgettable is used in far too many book descriptions. I complain about that all the time, but these characters actually are unforgettable. I think we're on number 14. This is Milkman by Anna Burns. This is a heady, confusing, dreamlike, but also sardonic novel about a girl experiencing outsized consequences for minor decisions during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Number 13 is Border, A Journey to the Edge of Europe by Kopka Kosabova. That's anglicized. Kosabova would be the Bulgarian pronunciation, I think. Kosabova uses a mixture of travel writing, memoir, history, interviews to compile this sensory account of the shared border among Turkey, Greece, and Bulgaria. I historically have struggled with exactly that combination that I described, particularly memoir being incorporated into more historical sources. And she's the pinnacle of that in terms of what I've read. I think so highly of the flexibility and scope and imagination in her work. Number 12 is The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. I just love 19th century novels. I love them to distraction, truly. And this is just 19th century novel, capitalized, italicized, underlined. Everything about them that speaks to me is in this book. Isabel Archer is our famous heroine. She's a young woman who is traveling to Europe from America for the first time. And of course, our bright young American ingenue is going to be sullied by the decadence and the dour history of our European setting. Number 11 is The Door by Mogda Sobu. This is translated from Hungarian by Lynn Rix, and what a spell this book wove over me. It's about a writer and her housekeeper, and the housekeeper is one of my favorite characters that I've read in all of fiction. I've said it before and I'll say it again, unconventional love. I want to find more of these types of stories. Which brings us to our top 10 for any of you who are still with me. Number 10 is Regarding the Pain of Others by Susan Sontag. I can't even tell you how much Susan Sontag's writing has changed the way I think of the majority of what I read and the way I interact with the world, frankly. This book in particular is interrogating the platitudes and assumptions surrounding how effective images of suffering can be and the ways in which they're effective for us. Number 9 is the book that made me far less afraid of Virginia Woolf. It is Mrs. Dalloway. I feel really emotional thinking about this novel. It follows a woman named Clarissa Dalloway through one day in her life, and we also jump to a number of other perspectives, and this is one of her post-war books, where she was one of the first novelists to really engage with what we now call PTSD. This book demands to be annotated because it demands to be savored and adored. It really does. 8 is Winter by Ali Smith, and as you saw in 2016, that was the year that I first discovered her, and I since have read over 10 of her books. This is the second of her seasonal quartet. It's playing primarily with A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens and Cymbeline by Shakespeare, but there's so much intertextuality in this. And, conversation with other forms of media is told through these intentionally ridiculous characters who are thrust into ridiculous situations. And if I'm remembering correctly, in my original review of this, I compared it to A Collection of Feathers, where you don't even realize how much any one moment or scene or observation is contributing to the experience until you get to the end and you're holding something so much weightier than you realize. Clearly, I'm freaking out about all of these books, but I would say there's a sort of cutoff point here. These top 7 are just... Number 7 is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. In hindsight, I think the fact that this won the Booker made me hold out on literary prizes a little longer than I should have. This is told in a play-like profusion of voices from a graveyard where Abraham Lincoln's young son, Willie, has just been interred. It is funny, bawdy, strange. It's about grief, feeling both fulfilled and unfulfilled by the life that you've led, letting go, refusing to let go. Number 6 is Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Tien. And this is right up there in terms of books that I would reread this second. I've been thinking about rereading this a lot at the end of this year. This is about several generations of a Chinese family throughout the course of 20th century Chinese history and ultimately leading to part of that family's immigration to Canada. Tien is openly influenced by Shostakovich, and this whole book is structured like a symphony. It's just craft with a capital C up in here, and in a way that only contributes to the emotional attachment to the characters. Number 5 is The Cost of Living, a working autobiography by Deborah Levy. This is my most gifted book. This is Deborah Levy's deceptively brief take on her life after her divorce, and you get all these vignettes of feeling like she's trying to reestablish her identity in relation to no one else. In terms of line-by-line perfection, this is up there. I just think that it's exquisite. Number 4 is Middlemarch by George Eliot. It's perfect. So many other adjectives you could use, but they all feel like an approximation of the true adjective, which is perfect. It's set in a fictional Midlands-like town in 19th century England called Middlemarch. And God is a woman in this book. We have the voice of God lording over all of our characters. And it is the most compassionate, probing narrator that you could wish for in any novel. Something blasphemous about even positioning this book here at number 3. It is Lila by Marilynne Robinson. Can't remember if I read Gilead before I started my channel or if I was just an idiot and didn't put it on my favorites of the year at that time. But I've since read all 4 of her Gilead novels and several of her collections of essays. And what a thinker Marilynne Robinson is. And I guess similar to George Eliot in a number of ways, how compassionate and perceptive and curious she is about the human condition. And she, both in her fiction and nonfiction, wants to establish a sense of the metaphysical in the ordinary. This book in particular is about a woman who has been neglected her entire life, and how she gets to the place where she's finally cherished. Number 2 is The Golden Fool by Robin Hobb. This is my favorite of her Realm of the Elderling series. What I'll say about this one is it's book 8 of a 16-book series. and follows our main protagonist. This is kind of the culmination of what Hobb can do in terms of pulling together threads from previous novels and just walloping you emotionally more than any piece of literary fiction. Other than Don Quixote, okay? Other than Don Quixote, this series has made me think more about first person versus third person perspective in writing and the way that influences a text, and the interaction of characters of different identities, and particularly characters of different gender representations, characters of different ages. I've thought more about that from this epic fantasy series than I have from almost anything else that I've read. That leaves one number. My favorite book of the last 5 years is Prairie Fires, The American Dreams of Laura Ingalls Wilder by Caroline Fraser. Yes, I am an American, and yes, I loved the Little House books growing up. But I would argue for this book's relevance to even people who don't fit into those categories. It has all the components of the best biographies in that Laura Ingalls Wilder led an extraordinary life, and even just laying out the basic facts of that life and contextualizing them within their historical period. I mean, that's going to be a great read, you know, in many ways a novelistic read. But then for this book, in many instances quite subtly, to push and prod at the ways that she chose to look back on her life, structure them narratively, and sell them to children. It elevates it. And then the further elevating factor is the ways that this reflects on national mythology. And yes, this is America's national mythology of pioneering and rugged individualism, and conquering the West and settler colonialism explicitly and specifically. But it is so observant about how national mythologies are created generally, and I think could apply again to any reader. Wow, I am buzzing from that. I feel like I've just taken several shots of Prosecco. I so appreciate you watching this video. Happy holidays to all of you who are celebrating holidays around this time. I would love to hear if you're surprised or very much not surprised by any of these selections, if you've read any of these books or would like to read them, and I will see you soon for another video.